change. So the idea for DORA really came out of this 2012 annual meeting for the American Society for Cell Biology. And it happened on one of the conference floors. I believe it was at a poster session where researchers and academic editors were discussing the impact that journal-based metrics were having on the reward and incentive system in academia. Really thinking critically about what it meant for who was getting rewarded and why, what that meant for the composition of the research workforce, and the influence that the use of these metrics were having on research culture and research integrity more generally. So as a result of this discussion, the declaration was published in 2013, and it has two main recommendations: to stop using journal-based metrics for hiring, promotion, and funding decisions, and to consider the value and impact of all research contributions. And then, Haley, if you move on to the next slide, I think, or sorry, if you go back to the other slide, I wasn't quite finished. So in 2017 then, there was a turning point for DORA. And this was really when a group of organizations then recognized that DORA was very successful at raising awareness. But raising awareness doesn't necessarily lead to culture change. So this caused an active initiative really to support and facilitate culture change. So around that point in 2017, we made the shift from words on a page, a website that was collecting signatures, to now being an active initiative that's really working to support and facilitate culture change for research assessment across scholarly disciplines and around the world. So now I'm ready for the next slide, Haley. Thank you so much. So DORA's vision as an initiative then really is to advance practical and robust approaches to research assessment reform. Just like I said, sort of globally and across all scholarly disciplines. And specifically, we still hope to raise awareness because we know that's important, but we also want to facilitate the implementation of new practices that are able to recognize and reward a variety of those research contributions. And in doing so, to catalyze change across the academic community and to improve equity. And that is all I have to share for DORA. I'm happy to drop a few links in the chat to get you familiar with some of our work. But thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we do.
Thank you, and with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ona, for an introduction to LIBSENSE. But you're muted.
Yes, that happens. Thank you. So I was saying, it's my turn to share a little bit on LIBSENSE. Hopefully, at least the African participants will be aware of LIBSENSE. If I could just put a LIBSENSE link to the website, into the chat. So LIBSENSE is a community of REN and library collaborations. It's governed by the 3 regional RENs. Africa is broken into 3 regional areas as far as research networks are concerned. So WACREN operates the West and Central African region, but there's also Ubuntu Alliance in South and East Africa, and ASREN in North Africa and the Middle East. So these 3 regional RENs they partnered in a project called Africa Connect that's had 3 iterations in the last this is the 3rd iteration. There are 4-year iterations, so this will be about 12 years into the project. And what had happened after a while was that we realized as we were building these networks that we needed to connect with the library, and that's how it started initially. So LIBSENSE is actually an acronym for Library Support for Embedded Support for E-Infrastructures. But that's, as open science became a movement, this community evolved alongside. So our goals are essentially to support the cultural change, this webinar being part of that, as research networks provide the technical support to drive open science in Africa, build capacity through training, and develop services, including infrastructure. So we try and do this at 3 levels. Haley, please keep moving the slide. So we do this at 3 levels. On the continental level as the partnership between the 3 regional networks within our different regions. And then on national and institutional levels, we have 3 pillars of which we work through. One's policy, and in that area, we deal with open science policies, governance, and leadership of open science in general. On infrastructure, we work with open access repositories, journals, data and open discovery services. So a lot of this is community driven. So some of what Anna was mentioning about the other ways to assess research is linked to some of this. And from a capacity building point of view, we do what we're doing now, so stimulating and growing communities of practice, and then training, lots of training. We have 3 working languages that are sort of mirror the communities in Africa. We have English, French. WACREN is a predominantly French region, and Arabic for North African colleagues. We also have a working group that deals with indigenous and traditional knowledge. Haley? So I thought I would, before we actually get the speakers today to discuss research assessment, I thought I would give you examples of what's happening for those that are not familiar with what we've been doing in LIBSENSE. So on the policy pillar, we have a statement that was contributed to the UNESCO Global Recommendation. It lists principles and actions for what we see as working in Africa, in the African context on open science. It's in the, I will put a link once I'm through. We have a project called the LIBSENSE National Open Science Roadmaps, where we gather in each country, we gather stakeholders that are connected to open science to discuss an action plan for the country. We have run those successfully in a number of countries, Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, and the next iteration is in Cote d'Ivoire. It's going to be co-located with our annual conference. I'll speak about that at the end of the webinar. We also have these workshops where we're collaborating with UNESCO and regional higher education associations of vice chancellors to take some of the high-level principles of the recommendation and look at practical ways in which we implement them on campus, and supports open science policy development and open access policies at institutional level. On the infrastructure side, we have a couple of demonstrators at national level. So in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, we have the National Virtual Library, which we are supporting so we can move from institutional run infrastructure that is hard to support and doesn't stay contemporary to national shared platforms that have that everybody can use and subscale the problems that we encounter with supporting these platforms. In Nigeria, a micro publications platform is being trialed out, and the goal is to make this national platform work with stakeholders and connect with national activity to make this national platform. Same thing in Uganda. As a regional demonstrator, we have a project collaboration with Roof Forum, where Roof Forum is a network of agricultural organizations in universities across Africa, about 150 universities partner in that. So what we are building with Roof Forum is a data platform that allows them to sort of engage with open science as it evolves. And to make this all secure, we have a federated identity platform. These are just examples. If you go to the website, you'll see a little bit more of what we do. Similarly, with capacity building, we're doing stuff like this where we strengthen, or we first of all raise awareness and try and strengthen the African expertise in open science. We have a number of regional workshops. There's one ongoing now. There's a webinar series on open access for open access journal editors and publishers, also available on the website. So the librarians and those interested in this, in journal editing, are very welcome to register. And there is ongoing work within Africa Connect 3 to establish a learning training program for early career open science research, early career researchers. The idea here is to basically give some practical knowledge and experience and training to early career researchers who we think will be the group that will sort of accelerate the uptake of open science in our regions. I think, so I think at this point, next slide, Haley. I think that's the last slide, my last slide. Right. So the aims of this webinar, that's the introduction of LIBSENSE and DORA. So the aims of this webinar is to raise awareness about what responsible research assessment is and why it's important. I think in some of Anna's introduction, I should touch a bit on that, and identify what the research outputs are currently valued or what should be valued in Africa, and provide ideas and to stimulate dialogue about establishing an African initiative. And this initiative, Laura will speak a little bit more about that in her presentation, because there's an example in Latin America to sort of consider. But this initiative is will be designed to coordinate knowledge exchange about research assessment practices in the region, and address the other issues that are listed there. But more importantly, it would give us a common entity across the region and Africa to help take this webinar forward and link with other stakeholders that are relevant, to reform research assessment practices. Next. Right, I think without further ado, I will let Professor Frederick Ama of the University of Cape Town introduce himself and start his presentation. So Frederick, please.
Yes, hello everyone, and good morning from Ghana. I'm from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. University of Cape Town is in South Africa. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be part of the panel that will discuss responsible research assessment in the context of Africa. There are some salient issues that we need to consider. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to roll the slides from here or you're going to control it from your end.
Oh, I'll advance the slides.
Okay, all right. So can we go to the next, please? Yes, so we talk about responsible research assessment. The fundamental questions that we need to pose when we talk about responsible research assessment is responsible research assessment for whom and by whom. This means that we have to look at a broad catch of stakeholders that are involved, and then the target groups that will be recipients of this assessment. So for whom, we are looking at the target groups of this research assessment. It could be academics, it could be the business community, it could be stakeholder communities, it could be the private sector, it could be civil society. So research assessment for whom? It could also be for funders. So that is very important. And by whom? Because if it is a research assessment that is done by a small or a narrow group of stakeholders, then we lose out on the issue about how comprehensive the assessment really is, or consultative the assessment really is. So these are very, very important and fundamental questions that we need to ask. And we also need to bring to the fore the fact that the knowledge production process is not even. So we have a lot of epistemic injustice regarding what research strands are valued in certain academic communities and stakeholder groups, and how we can bring that on board when we are talking about responsible research assessment. Next slide, please. Yes, so we know that research assessment is very important. There's an imperative when it comes to research assessment. Then what will be the imperative? There are several factors that we need to talk about. We need to understand why, how, and whether research is even effective in the first place, and how we can tailor it and support it to ensure that the processes and outcomes of the research are things that are socially desirable. The next point is about advocacy. We need to demonstrate what the benefits of supporting research are and how we can also deepen understanding of the research process among policymakers and even the general public. This is very, very important because society has a stake in the research that we do. Then, of course, research assessment is also very important because it helps us to determine whether, next point, please. It helps us to determine whether we are distributing the funding in an equitable manner across the research and innovation ecosystem. This is very, very important. Then the issue about accountability. We need to document evidence that the funds that have been deployed for the research have been used in an efficient and effective manner. And then the funders have return on investment. That is very, very important. And then we also need to do some comparative analysis to look at the value of higher education institutions and then the research that we do in those institutions. We know that when it comes to research, there are various research strands and there are various academic communities and what they do in particular, but we need to compare and to recognize the value of each of these strands. Earlier on, I alluded to epistemic injustice. So these are all very, very important issues that come to the fore when it comes to research assessment. Next point, please. Then also, we need to be agile in the way we do things to drive organizational change in the structures that we already have, in the behaviors and cultures, and then the research activities, and even the things that we prioritize as academics or higher education institutions. This is also very important. Next slide. I think we need to move on. So please go on, just roll the slides. Yes, so there are several goals when it comes to responsible research and assessment. We want to ensure that we engender quality. The research that we are doing is also embraces diversity, is equitable and relevant. I've mentioned that already. And then I think the most important thing is to ensure that we have open sciences for social transformation, sustainability, development, and innovation. So open sciences is very, very, very important when it comes to one of the goals of research assessment. Next slide, please. I want to dwell a few minutes on the 5 key pillars of openness. Perhaps I'll talk about the first and the last on our screen. Now, UNESCO talks about the need for us to open dialogue among knowledge production systems. And here we are talking about mutual knowledge and recognition of complementarities between diverse ways of knowing or epistemologies, in particular, indigenous knowledge systems. We know that in the knowledge production process, sometimes what we have accrued over millennia in indigenous knowledge systems are not valued and therefore do not feature prominently when it comes to policy making and decision making. So this is very, very important. And then we also need to look at how we can engage a lot of social actors for them to see the relevance of the research that we are doing beyond academia. Next slide. Yes, so when it comes to the African context and responsible research, there are some key issues that I want us to tease out in this particular discussion. So we have to really understand what is happening when it comes to intra-African collaboration opportunities and how we can move from disciplinary boundaries and cross to multidisciplinary through to interdisciplinary and then finally to transdisciplinary research. This is very, very important because as we realize that intra-African mobility of academics is very, very low. Most of our research partnerships and constellations are between the global north and the global south. And we need to stimulate intra-African collaboration opportunities, very, very important. Then we also need to center stage research ethics, especially in the context of indigenous communities. This is something I've alluded to earlier. And then we know that on the continent, there's a lot of heterogeneity when it comes to capacities in research output, capacities in equipment, capacities in core competencies, capacities in technical know-how. Therefore, we need to develop national research innovation ecosystems that are responsive to various contexts. This is also very important when it comes to research assessment. Next slide, please. Then when we talk about indicators and metrics of excellence, we make sure that we have Afrocentric measures of excellence, and that resonates with various stakeholder communities on the continent. This is very, very important, because if you have a metric that does not resonate with the community, then there's no way they are going to embrace it and use it even in the assessment process. And then, of course, we also know that because of the different research bases and capabilities across organizations in country and without country, we need to look at the national science ecosystems across board, the nature and scope of those ecosystems, the size and shape of those ecosystems are also very, very important. Then we talk about the quality of standing of researchers. We should consider that not just in terms of research or scholarly output, publications, and impact, but we also need to look at how those researchers engage with those that are climbing the academic ladder. This is also very important. Next slide. We also need to adopt a system-wide approach when it comes to thoughts on open science, and then we need to contextualize these notions within national regulatory systems, because we know that there are variegated capacities across nations on the continent. Africa is not homogeneous. It's a heterogeneous continent in terms of research capability, in terms of core competencies and the like. So we need to look at that. Then we also need to appreciate context and accept the fact that the understanding and interpretation of open science differs systematically by funding agency, by specific country, and by region. So all of these issues are things that we need to also bring on board when we talk about developing metrics and indicators for research assessment. And then critical to this endeavor is the question of how we ensure that we preserve indigenous knowledge while ensuring an open science agenda. Next slide. Yes, so responsible research assessment requires situated methodologies. We need to look at authentic context, the culture of the stakeholder group, and the research communities involved. This is very, very important. We also need to look at both micro level criteria for evaluation and then macro level criteria for evaluation. These are also very, very important. I realize that the slides I'm presenting is not an updated one, but it has most of the points I wanted to allude to. So that is very, very important. Then I think the participation of social movements or civil society and local groups, even in the evaluation process, is also key. Next slide. Now, one of the things that we need to understand or accept is that the fact that something is open does not necessarily make it fair. So openness does not translate to fairness. It is something that we must always think deeply about. Next slide. Because openness does not necessarily equate to fairness, we need to ensure that open science can contribute to equity and enable African researchers or African communities to learn about and research on topics that are most important to them. This should not be something which is imposed on them by any dominant stakeholder community or research community. They should be able to learn about those research topics and then have their research recognized and rewarded, and make sure that this research, which is indigenous to the scientific communities across the continent, will also translate into impact for those communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ama. My apologies for mixing up University of Cape Town and University of Cape Coast. I should know better considering I'm just your neighbor. But moving on, I would like to introduce Laura Rivelli from Follec in Glasgow. She would introduce herself a little bit more. And Laura, please.
Well, thank you very much, Omo. Well, we appreciate very much this invitation from the Latin American Forum for Research Assessment. I am Laura Rivelli. I am the coordinator of this forum in CLACSO. CLACSO is the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. So I am, as I was saying, I am very delighted to learn more about this LIBSENSE experience, and also to exchange knowledge and collaborate to contribute to the research assessment reform practices in both regions, and to have a South-South collaboration also in these issues. So Haley, please, next slide. Well, as you know, Follec, as I was mentioning, is a program that was created in 2019 in CLACSO. CLACSO is an international non-governmental institution with association status at UNESCO, and it currently brings together more than 800 research and postgraduate centers in social sciences and humanities in 55 countries in Latin America and also in other continents. And it has more than 90 working groups in broad thematic fields of social sciences and humanities, with more than 4,500 researchers. But also these working groups have the participation of public policy makers, representatives and members of non-governmental institutions and organizations, and members from social movements and activisms in our region. So please, next slide, Haley. So why, I would like to talk a little bit more about the case as Follec as a case study. Dora helped us, and Anna and Haley particularly, to disseminate our case study. So I would like to mention which were the first motivations to create from CLACSO the Follec. And one of them was the increasing influence of publishing models outside Latin America based on the impact factor of journals in our region. Although Latin America and the Caribbean have a long tradition of open access and of public knowledge managed by communities, this was not the orientation of the policies by scientific and particularly higher institutions in the region. There was the biggest pressure for foundations and national science and councils to guide research evaluation practices by international mainstream metrics. This generated a general disconform with these criteria, and the fact that researchers in our region were rewarded only when publishing in these mainstream journals. As LIBSENSE representatives and researchers in Africa know, this limited local autonomy of research agendas, discouraged good open access practices in our region, and also it discouraged the interaction of research with society. And in fact, there was less funding of community-owned infrastructures because there were scarce funds that were directed, or that are in many cases directed still to APCs. So please, next, Haley. So which is our strategy to promote change from Follec? Well, as our colleagues in LIBSENSE and in Africa, as Frederick mentioned before, are doing also, we started with opening the discussion in the region, creating an agenda which is in dialogue with international declarations such as DORA, also the Leiden Manifesto, and many other declarations of principles and actions, and latest, the UNESCO declaration, recommendation, on open science, which, as Frederick mentioned, makes a very special emphasis on the need to reform research assessment systems globally to involve a broad conception of knowledge production, which assumes different forms of creation and communication that are not limited to publication in international journals. So first of all, as we made a diagnosis of the situation in the region, like the one Frederick mentioned previously, and then from Follec, we promoted a declaration of principles, which is still in discussion and will be presented in June 2022 in the conference of Claxo in Mexico. And then we start elaborating a series of advocacy papers to promote research assessment policies and reform on specific topics, particularly current information systems in science and technology and innovation, the defense of multilingualism and the promotion of biodiversity, the promotion of national journals. We also developed a regional consultation on peer review and in our region, and which were the challenges in order to strengthen that process. And also we develop a questionnaire on mission-oriented research proposals and innovative forms of evaluation in Latin America, and also in dialogue with our partners in Asia. The idea was to also identify which were the most innovative trends and practices in research assessment and to highlight those experiences. That paper will be published and disseminated in the next week. So next week, sorry. Haley, next, please. So how we are working, which is our dynamic and our process of construction of this reform, this process of reform, where Follec and Claxo are working, as I mentioned before, with an international organizational structure, yes, the one of Claxo, but also in dialogue with partners and like DORA internationally, the ISC, the International Science Council, and other international organizations. But our key point is that change is in a way facilitated in our context where there is a strong movement in the base of the academic institutions and centers from Claxo. So there's also a bottom-up promotion of these research assessment reform from institutions all over Latin America. So we use a participatory design process to collect feedback from stakeholders during national and international meetings, and to refine and inform research assessment proposals and to keep them moving forward. Please, Haley, next. So the challenge, and some of the main challenges, one of them is to advance in dialogue processes. As Anna mentioned at the beginning, we are still working on this point. It's still quite important to mobilize this topic, but also to identify in different countries, institutions of our regions, who are those promoters of change? Yes, who are those agents of change? And also we are following some experiences of reform in some countries of Latin America. We also, one other of the challenges are the cultural change through bottom-up approach. And there we agree also with Frederick that the early career researchers have a key role in both regions, promoting research assessment reform, which is more broadly a cultural reform or a cultural shift in research academic culture. And as LIBSENSE mentioned previously, we also work with the fact that we need to strengthen open infrastructure. There we have some proposals related with the CRIS, the current research information systems, to strengthen this aspect, but also we work together with many other reference from the open infrastructure like La Referencia, Rivelli, databases, in order to create some interoperability or to promote community-based participation in open infrastructure. And of course, we are also guided by the principles, by the FAIR and the CARE principles in this matter. Please, next. Some of the main points to highlight in our experience is the need of an international collective initiative to bring about alignment towards common principles of research assessment reform, North-South, North-South-South, South-South collaborations to promote a global agenda and a global cultural shift in research assessment practices. We believe that this global agenda is based from our experience on knowledge as the public good, equity, diversity, strengthening research careers, the orientation to sustainable development goals, also is interlinked with research integrity and academic mobility in our regions. So we believe that there is also a need to harmonize these policies, educational programs, and common principles and standards globally, but also within our regions. And in order to do that, we think that federated infrastructures of open science that support biodiversity and collaboration with society are needed, and not avoiding going to a model of fragmentation of different infrastructure. We need to join together and to federate and make them operable with FAIR and CARE principles. So in order to do that, of course, we need financial support to the openness of publication and research data, and also to the necessary infrastructure and training of skilled human resources in our institutions in the region and research centers. So I think that was the last slide. Haley, is that correct? Thank you very much, Haley. Well, thank you all. It is a pleasure.
Well, Haley, do you want to sort of, because thank you very much, Laura. I think I'll let Haley sort of take it up from here.
Sure. So now we'd like to open up for a Q&A with our two lovely speakers. And oh, I see we actually also have a question for Omo as well. So yes, so alrighty. So if you do have questions, please post them in the Q&A. We'll also try to pull them from the chat as well. But I suppose I'll start with the first question. This is for Omo, but I think could be applied to any of the speakers. What strategy works best to increase the engagement among the community of practice, especially when it has a range of stakeholders from students to heads of institutions? Is this online or in-person engagement? And I think this would also be a lovely question for Laura to address as well from the perspective of regional collaboration. So first, we'll start with you, Omo.
Well, I will talk specifically about the LIBSENSE case. It applies to the research networks as well. So there are different kinds of engagements, so it is a mix of both. We're finding out that to scale, and especially when we're sort of growing small communities of practice, that the online mechanisms have helped make that, continuous. But when you need to speak with decision makers, especially the leadership, face-to-face meetings where people can actually come out in breakout sessions and have face-to-face discussions have proven very useful. So I would say a mix of both. As far as my role is concerned and the work I do in LIBSENSE, it is largely in trying to connect with leadership, connect with the different stakeholders at that level, and then connect with the users in the community. But I've seen that the online connecting to librarians, for instance, has been really helped by the online mechanisms. And in Africa, they have been accelerated by the COVID pandemic. Before that, the uptake was a little bit mixed, but since then, it's been, online mechanisms have become almost the mainstay amongst the community. So I don't know what Laura's experience is.
Thank you, Omo and Hayley. Well, I agree with you. There are different groups of interest, and I think that the big challenge that we have learned in Follec experience, and also following the experience of DORA and other initiatives internationally, is that the big challenge is a multi-scale challenge, that at the same time we need to target different groups of community groups, yes? So we make activities, we produce papers to be discussed on a general topic, but then that topic, for example, the case of, for example, multilingualism and biodiversity, we discuss that topic in different levels. Yes, we discuss that topic with funders, how to promote those criteria within the evaluation of career researchers. We discuss that topic also at institutions, and we discuss that topic with early career researchers, for example, just to make an idea of one of the strategies. What we have learned is that it's not one community at the time, but all of them at the same time with some key topics that are more relevant in the agenda of research, responsible research assessment, but also in the regional agenda, no? Which is the topic within that extended agenda of responsible research assessment that is a key point in each of the regions.
Thank you both for those excellent points. I have in the chat from Professor Duty. Hello, Professor Duty. Thank you for your question. I think for Professor Arma, can we start a network of Africans into an African Forum for Open Science and Responsible Research Assessment?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think it's very important. I think in order to answer this question, we need to know what is already existing. What are some of the initiatives that we have on the continent, and what opportunities do they offer? How can we latch on to those opportunities and leverage on the benefits that can accrue from those opportunities? Sometimes I realize that there are multiple strands of initiatives going on, and we duplicate efforts, and that might not be helpful. So we need to know, what exactly do we have now? Do we have some groups that have been catalyzed as a result of open science? Do we have some groups that have begun to aggregate around some specific issues on open science? How do we ensure that what we are doing is in sync with that other group and all of that? That is very, very important, because sometimes when you want to start all of this afresh, you realize that there's something in parallel which is also going on, and then instead of being collaborative, it becomes very competitive and then counterproductive. So I think that in order to answer this question in a very systematic manner, we need to know what already exists. There are continent-wide initiatives that are going on among universities. For instance, we have ARUA, we also have WACREN, we have the AAU. These are all continental groups that have interest when it comes to open science. How can we ensure that the stakeholders within these domains are brought on board to now catalyze a new movement that as we want to do? So I think this is very, very important in answering this particular question.
And if I may add to that, so that's what I think Frederick has been spying on our plans, because that's what we plan to do in April. So we're having the second Regional Policy Development Workshop that I mentioned with UNESCO. So in the first iteration, because of the circumstances at the time, it had to be online in the South and East African region. But even then, what we sought to do was to partner with the higher education associations, the regional associations. The thinking being that if these universities already have associations, then this sort of information and collaboration might emerge from partnering with them. So that is actually what led to this workshop, to this webinar. DORA, one of the board members of DORA presented in that, I've just put a link into the chat, presented in that meeting, and we connected with DORA. And the next meeting is in Abidjan, which is in the Western Central African region. This time it is names you mentioned are the same names. So we're partnering with, we're co-hosting with CAMES, CRUFA-ROSI, which are the French equivalents in the region, but we also have AWAU, the West African University Association, Vice Chancellors Ghana, Vice Chancellors Committee of Nigeria as well. So we're thinking with these regional organizations and national organizations, we should be able to filter out those groups that already exist and sort of collaborate with them. And that's my response to Dr. DG, I think it was. Yes, that's the intent. That's also why we have Laura here to sort of demonstrate what's happening with colleagues in Latin America, so we can sort of use that as templates to at least have a more robust discussion.
Thank you both. And I think, we'll have maybe, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if we have any final, thoughts or maybe pieces of advice from Laura for creating such initiatives, and before we move on to the closing thoughts for the webinar.
Yes.
Sorry. Just before Laura, I was just going to say it is a new topic. So and this webinar was supposed to stimulate the interest. So I'm not surprised there are not so many questions at this point in time, but I can see that this will happen, as we do some more work in this area, the likes of Professor Arma, we would get more and more questions. Go on, Laura.
No, something very brief. I wanted to comment that for Claxon, I think from what I have heard also from you too, the idea is to strengthen really openness, participation, and collaboration through a research assessment reform in our regions and in a global discussion. I think that is the key point, and that's why we are here. We are just enforcing those principles of collaboration, of participation, of mobilization to change, and reform research practices. And as Frederick mentioned, there are many initiatives in the communities in each region that need to be visibilized, strengthened, financed in order to be promoted and to be consolidated as good practices in research, assessment, and in open science. So we are here also to collaborate with you in the promotion of this change. thank you very much for the invitation. It was really very nice to hear all what you are doing just very near us in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, if I may come in.
Somebody, so what happened?
May I come in?
Go on, Frederick.
Yes, yes. So thank you very much. I think we have started on a very good note because we are learning from best practices in other contexts. That is fantastic. And then we also involving a plethora of stakeholders that have an interest in this particular issue of responsible research assessment. We know that we have to engage a large rate of stakeholders in order to get a comprehensive account of what we need to do to ensure that the indicators and metrics that we want to formulate to assess research is acceptable to a broad group of stakeholders. And therefore, this is very, very good that we have started in this particular manner, consulting the different stakeholders, looking at even the ways of knowing, looking at epistemic injustice, looking at what is it that African researchers have an interest in when it comes to research assessment. Because I can say for a fact that in most universities on the continent, they are questioning some of the indicators and some of the metrics because it doesn't resonate with them. And for those that resonate with them, they think that they may not be able to meet it because it is too stringent. And therefore, they need alternatives, which should also not compromise the quality of the research that is done. Because the goals of research assessment to ensure that we have something which is equitable, which is fair, which is also of a very high quality. So how do we make sure that we bring all of these core issues on board without necessarily compromising the integrity of the research assessment process? This is very, very important. And I believe that we've started on a good note by looking at all the stakeholder groups that will be able to give us insight into what they consider to be the important elements that we need to bring on board as part of the research assessment process. So we are thankful that we have been invited to be part of this process, and we look forward to an intellectually stimulating and long-standing encounter when it comes to responsible research assessment on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick.
Right, and we'll just share our final closing thoughts. So I want to say sincerest thanks to our speakers for their time and effort. Thank you to everyone who is in attendance for your excellent questions and for your comments in the chat. Please stay tuned for a blog summary report for this event. As Ono has alluded to, also stay tuned for the second LIBSENSE Regional Policy Development Workshop, which will take place as a pre-event to WACREN 2022. And I'll turn it over to you, Ono, for final thoughts before we close out.
No, thank you very much, Haley. I'm fully aware we've run out of time now, but it was a very, very interesting discussion. Thanks again to Professor Amar and Laura. we will be circulating some information about the next workshop and the WACREN 2022 conference. So we will send at least, we'll send the emails to all the registered attendees. So please let us know if you don't want us to disturb you. I hope not. And thank you very much for joining us. So the webinar is officially ended now.
All right. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.